Seeing Dexter as our favorite anti-hero is easy. He was basically Batman, right? But not everything he did was good. In plenty of instances, Dexter was actually a pretty horrible person. So let's take a look at what makes Dexter Morgan the worst, starting with the manipulation of his devoted wife, Rita Morgan. After manipulating her for months, Dexter finally convinced Rita to trust him. They were in a serious relationship, and no matter how odd that felt for him, he thought it was necessary for his own purposes. Dexter needed to blend in, and having a steady girlfriend made him seem as normal as he possibly could. But eventually, it went beyond that for him. Dexter started to care for Rita in a real way, and her kids were a part of that package. But her abusive ex-husband, Paul Bennett, was still in the picture. After torturing, raping, and abusing Rita for years, Paul was finally locked up for drug use and probation violations, but that didn't last forever. He was released from prison soon after she got serious with Dexter, and when he saw that someone else was sleeping with his wife and caring for his kids, Paul was not pleased at all. His worst side came out slowly but surely. He wanted to pretend as if he changed. He wanted Rita to believe that he was different after his prison stint, but in reality he was still the same lying, abusive, manipulative misogynist he'd always been. The only difference was that now he had Dexter to deal with. Once he was out of jail, Paul started doing little things to disrupt Rita's peaceful family life. He'd take the kids without warning her, show up to their house without notice, try to undermine her relationship and routine with Aster and Cody. And he didn't stop there. No matter how hard Rita tried to assert her boundaries, Paul tried just as hard to ignore them. Still, she kept as cool of a head as she could, and that only seemed to set him off even more. Eventually, Paul physically attacked Rita one drunken night, and when she defended herself with a bat, he tried to frame it as if she was the aggressor so he could take her kids away from her. The point is, Paul is a horrible person, but what Dexter did next was still pretty awful. Dexter lost his cool and knocked Paul out with a frying pan one night as he insulted and threatened Rita. While this was objectively cartoonishly funny and most certainly deserved, the repercussions were not. Dexter set Paul up to look as if he had relapsed and started using heroin again while he was on probation, and he woke up in a hotel room with a needle in his arm to the sound of police banging on his door. He was sent back to jail as a result, effectively ending the investigation into Rita, which was great, but while he was in there, he was driven crazy trying to prove that Dexter was the reason he was there. He got so frustrated one day while he was there that he got into a fight with another inmate and got killed. This was the father of his soon-to-be stepchildren, and perhaps their lives were better off without Paul in it, but no kid wants their dad to die, especially under those circumstances. This was without a doubt incredibly traumatizing for them. Even Rita was upset about the fact that Paul was killed in prison, but Dexter didn't care at all. He honestly seemed relieved to just not have to deal with it. He supposedly cared about Aster and Cody, and yet he shamelessly caused the death of their father and then manipulated their mother into believing that he was a drug addict himself to absolve himself of the crime. Paul definitely deserved some sort of justice for his ongoing harassment of Rita, but this is an objectively messed up end, and one of the worst things Dexter has ever done because of how it impacted the kids specifically. It shows how impulsive, manipulative, and selfish Dexter often is, and it's not even the worst thing he's ever done. Dexter had to commit to the bit after he claimed to be a heroin addict. He couldn't just leave Rita and her children alone after getting Paul killed, and maybe he should have. He lived a high-risk double life that constantly put them all in harm's way, but for some reason he refused to move on and let them live their lives in peace. Instead, he started attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings, making a mockery of that process and those who genuinely need the program to convince Rita that he really was a drug addict, but also committed to getting better to keep their relationship going. Of course, while he was in the program, he chose the most insane sponsor imaginable in the form of the walking red flag that is Lila West. He allowed her to get way too close to him. He let her talk him into going on a road trip to confront his mother's killer, and he lied about all of it to Rita because I guess he's allergic to being honest. While they were away on that trip, he and Lila may not have slept together, but I don't know many women who would have been okay with their longtime partner getting a shared hotel room with a hot drug addict and cuddling them in bed all night. When Rita found out about the trip, courtesy of Lila's big mouth and psychotic controlling nature, she was understandably upset and broke up with him, and even then he couldn't leave her alone. Once Lila became a problem for him personally, he tried to cut things off with her, but it was too late. She was obsessed with him and would do anything to get him back. Sadly, that included breaking into Rita's house, trying to frame Angel Batista for sexual assault, and kidnapping Aster and Cody before trying to kill them in a fucking fire. All of these horrible things happened without a doubt because of Dexter. His involvement with Lila was inappropriate from the very start, and before it was all over, she tried to murder 2 kids and actually did kill James Dokes. If Dexter took 1 second to think about anyone other than himself, he would have never been entangled with Lila in the first place. But again, his own desires trumped the needs of everyone around him, and as a result, the kids were traumatized even further, and an innocent man was blown to bits after being trapped in a remote cabin in the Everglades for days. Let's not forget about the only reason Dokes was in a position to be killed by Lila in the first place was because Dexter abducted him and locked him in a cage. Dokes was going to prove that Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher, and of course, Dexter couldn't let that happen. After all, that would go against his precious code. So instead, he trapped a man in a cage and planned to frame him as the Butcher instead. Dokes had a family and people who genuinely cared about him. He may not have been the nicest guy in the world, but he didn't deserve to be framed as a serial killer. He was just doing his job. Even if Lila hadn't killed him, the next few years of his life were going to be complete hell as he tried to clear his name, and if he wasn't able to, he most likely would have been sent to death row for Dexter's crimes. Is that justice? That would have been the unfair result of Dexter's increasingly selfish actions. And Dexter rationalized it all by pointing to Dokes' own duty kills and the fact that he had to stay out of jail himself to protect Deb, Rita, and the kids from the horrific truth of his serial killing. In Dexter's mind, it would have been totally fine if Dokes' family was destroyed and left to think their relative was a secret killer. But Rita and Deb just had to be shielded from that fact in Dexter's case. By the end of the second season, Dexter got his stepkid's father killed, lied about being a drug addict to get away with it, cheated on his serious girlfriend after killing her ex-husband, kidnapped an innocent man, planned to ruin his life, and then got him killed too. If that doesn't show just how terrible Dexter is, I don't know what would, but it gets worse. Harry taught Dexter that in order to kill with impunity and stay out of prison, he had to blend in. His relationship with Rita began as an attempt to do exactly that. He was just using her to keep people from thinking he was weird. Over time, he did start to genuinely care for Rita, Aster, and Cody, but not enough to get out of their lives, no matter how frequently he hurt them. By season 3, Rita was stupid enough to take Dexter back, overlooking his incredibly odd behavior, like showing up to his own apartment covered in mud and muck very early in the morning after being out all night. Then she allowed him to impregnate her and accepted his proposal for marriage. Those were all pretty bad choices on her part that any other woman probably would have discouraged her against if they knew what she had gone through with Dexter in just the past year. But it should have been Dexter who knew better than any of that. He shouldn't have put her in that position. He did it because he wanted to. He couldn't take a quick second to prioritize the health and safety of her children and allow the relationship to fizzle out. Instead, he knocked her up and all but trapped her into being in his life for the remainder of her own. If the havoc that Lila brought to the kids was any indication, Dexter knew that his double life was absolutely bad for Rita and her family. But rather than think about that at all, he started hanging out with Arthur Mitchell, the ghastly Trinity killer, foolishly thinking that he could learn something from a despicable monster. Harrison was already born at this point. Dexter was a new father and husband, and he still chose to spare Trinity's life for weeks just so he could take notes on how to be better at being a murderer with a family. Absolute insane decision for a father to make. In his defense, Dexter tried to keep Trinity away from his new family by using an alias and never bringing them anywhere near him, But before everything was over, Rita would wind up dead in a bathtub. Harrison would be permanently damaged, and Aster and Cody's lives would be destroyed as they were effectively orphaned. And after getting both of their parents killed, Dexter just pawned them off on their grandparents in Orlando and basically never really thought of them again. Before you watch any further, I'm happy to finally announce that I'm releasing the first limited drop of my t-shirts. At the start, there are only 100 available, so make sure you buy them while you can at dtmerch.store. Enjoy the video. Think about it. After season 5, when does he ever see or even think about Rita's children? Cody may have been a bit more resilient, but Aster was a wreck. She was lying, sneaking out of her grandparents' house, and drinking by the age of 12. If Rita was alive, she wouldn't have been doing any of that. But because Dexter wanted to hobnob with a maniac for a few weeks, Aster was on track to be a complete train wreck, and her only remaining parent, Dexter, did nothing to stop it. He completely abandoned Rita's kids after traumatizing them and ruining their lives, and he never even stopped to think about it. He never looked back. Probably was the best thing he could do for him, but it wasn't with the right intentions. He spent so long pretending to care about them, only to leave them in the dust after Rita died. For someone who claims to want to protect children, Dexter sure did a number on his own kids without a second thought, and their lives wouldn't be the only ones destroyed in his wake. By the start of season 7, Dexter's secret was exposed to Deb after she walked in on him killing Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer. He was caught red-handed by the lieutenant of homicide, and he still refused to go to jail or even be taken in for his crimes. Instead, he insisted that Deborah compromise her own morals and identity to help him get away with it all. He convinces her to let him destroy the evidence, and then reluctantly lets her help him cover up the murder by burning down the crime scene, a church. And he couldn't even do that right. They left evidence all over the place. There was plastic on Travis's burnt corpse. There was CCTV footage of Deb filling up a gas can a mile away from the church. And worst of all, the blood slide. You know, basically Dexter's Ring of Mordor that he insisted on keeping despite Harry's warnings and how close he was to being caught in the past for having them in his possession. They were found at the scene of the crime. It was discovered by Captain Maria LaGuerta, who was perhaps the worst person who could have seen it. And from there, her investigation into the Bay Harbor Butcher was back on. She never believed that Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher because she knew him personally. But she let it go years earlier because everyone else thought the evidence was conclusive. Dokes wasn't alive to defend himself, so she had no choice but to move on as the case was closed by her department and the FBI. But that blood slide being in the church meant that the butcher was probably still alive and active, and she knew it. Everyone already knew that the butcher was a member of the Miami Metro Homicide Department, which made her list of potential suspects very short. During her investigation, she eventually narrowed that list down to Dexter alone. She knew he was the butcher, and she was determined to prove it. But it wasn't only going to hurt Dexter if she was successful. LaGuerta found the footage of Deb filling up the gas can. She knew that Deb helped Dexter burn down the church, and she knew that Deb was covering for her brother. So when LaGuerta started closing in on Dexter, Deb was caught in the crosshairs. Her entire life and career would essentially be over if Dexter was finally found out, and it was all his fault. She tried to call in the murder of Travis, and he played on her sympathies to talk her out of it. He should have never let her help him destroy the crime scene. He knew that she had no clue what she was doing in that realm, but he let her do it anyway to avoid an argument at best, or to ensure her silence by making her culpable at worst. Don't get caught, right? He was an awful brother in that moment, and he wasn't exactly sibling of the year before that. Deb never had a brother, only the illusion of one. Dexter made sure of that. And what was his response to learning that LaGuerta was onto Deb? First, he tries to destroy LaGuerta's career by making it look like she was setting him up as the Bay Harbor Butcher in order to clear her friend James's name, and when that wasn't enough to get her to back off, he decided he'd just kill her. Dexter decided that he was going to kill a completely innocent woman so that he can avoid jail time. The same woman that Dexter killed Miguel Prado for almost killing. That's insane and horrible. And what about his code? Dexter spent all the previous seasons pretending like he valued the code so much, but he clearly liked the part about not getting caught more than he liked the part about never killing an innocent. and only killing murderers who managed to evade justice. Sure, Maria was a nuisance. Sure, she was a ladder-climbing asshole who had no qualms about hurting other people's careers in the department to benefit herself, but she was completely undeserving of Dexter's table, and he knew that. Still, he couldn't stand the idea of finally going to prison and being placed on death row, so he figured he'd just kill her instead. It's a disgusting reminder of just how selfish and dangerous Dexter really is. There is absolutely no justification for targeting Maria, and his deranged father telling him to never get caught is not an excuse. Maria did not deserve to die, and as if that isn't bad enough, Deb caught on to his demented plan, came to stop him, and ended up killing LaGuerta herself just to protect her morally bankrupt older brother. He again put her in such a compromising situation that her mental health completely deteriorated once it was all over. As a result, Deb quit her job, started doing drugs, and lived in a reckless fashion that put her in constant danger. She didn't care if she lived or died after what she did to Maria. Dexter was her only remaining family, and he was a murderous loon. Deb was all alone, and she had absolutely no support. She couldn't talk to anyone about what she went through without incriminating herself, and she couldn't be around Dexter after what he'd done. Her life was effectively over, and it was all because of Dexter's selfishness. Again, Deb was yet another victim of Dexter's cruel and unceasing inclination toward his own self-preservation. And even then, he couldn't just leave her alone. She tried her best to stay as far away from him as possible, and he tracked her down because he couldn't stand the idea of her not being in his life. She was safer being away from him than she would ever be with him back in her life, but he didn't care. He hunted her down and all but dragged her back to Miami. And she would be dead within the next year as a result. Much like Rita, Dexter's need to kill people resulted in Deb's demise. And that may have been inadvertent, but Dexter would go on to kill a decent and innocent man for his own gain in Iron Lake, New York. But before that, he would make yet another horrible decision that almost ruined his son's life. Hannah McKay was a terrible person. She had already gone about killing people for fun with her stupid criminal pedophile boyfriend when she was 15 years old, and she wasn't done there. She later killed her own husband when he tried to coerce her into aborting their child, and it's speculated that she killed the older woman who owned the plant nursery before her. She also killed a counselor who was molesting young girls in the juvenile detention center she wound up in. And while that may have been seen as defensible by most people, what she went on to do later and the murder she committed while she and Wayne Randall were on their little crime spree was not. Much like Dexter, Hannah was determined to stay out of prison at all costs. So when true crime author Sal Price was on the brink of releasing a book about her crimes and re-exposing her to the possibility of going back to prison, she just straight up killed him. The only reason she was able to do that is because Dexter spared her life. He knew she was a lying murderer and even got her strapped to a kill table himself, but for no other reason than the fact that he found her attractive, he let her go and started sleeping with her. What happened to that all-guiding code he was obsessed with living by then? How could he possibly justify allowing Hannah to live after all the murder he knew she committed, but people like Maria LaGuerta were fair game? It makes no sense. His entire justification for everything he had done leading up to that point completely fades away when he does things like spare Hannah McKay. He doesn't care about his code. He cares about being free to do whatever the fuck he wants. He acts so aggrieved when he acts outside of the code in other instances, but when he is doing so to get something he wants, it doesn't even come up. The truth is that if Dexter actually valued the code as much as he claimed, Hannah McKay would have gotten a knife to the chest like everyone else he wrapped up. But because he found her attractive and he saw another potential human connection, she lived to kill again. Sal Price's blood is on Dexter's hands as well because he knew what Hannah was capable of and just left her to run the streets unchecked. But it gets worse. In the past, Dexter acted as if his sister's safety was the most important thing in the world. Remember, he killed his own biological brother to keep Deb safe. And yet for some reason, when Hannah tried to kill Deb by poisoning her with her own anti-anxiety medication, which by the way she was only taking because of the number Dexter had done on her psyche, he still can't bring himself to take her out. He does turn in evidence to get her put back in prison for killing Sal Price, but even after that, he visits her in jail and makes out with her. He still wants to be with a woman who not only tried to kill his sister, but lied about it and gaslit him as if he was crazy for thinking she did. Where is the moral compass? Where is the self-respect? Hannah played him like a fiddle, killed a guy, and almost took Deb out, and he was still sitting around pining over her. It's ridiculous. Hannah was just as deserving of his knife as anyone, and he just let her get away with everything. Hannah eventually broke out of prison and moved away to start over, but let's not forget, when Lila tried to run away to Paris, Dexter literally took a plane trip to find her, followed her there, and killed her to make sure she paid for what she did to Dokes. But when Hannah runs away after killing an innocent man, no doubt killing whoever she wanted along the way, he just lets it go. And eventually she showed back up and almost killed them both with poison, and he still does nothing. Instead of protecting himself, his child, and his sister by finally taking Hannah out, he gets back into a relationship with her and plans to run away to Argentina to help her continue evading police. It's literally nuts. And the only reason he didn't go through with their plan is because he got Deb gravely injured again in his pursuit of the brain surgeon, Oliver Saxon. Deb begged Dexter to stop killing people, a reasonable request. She tried to help him become rehabilitated to her own detriment, but he just kept on. And by the time the series was over, she would be shot so gravely by one of his intended targets that she had a stroke while in the hospital and was rendered brain dead. Dexter then goes into the hospital, cuts her off life support, and drops her body in the ocean, because that's what he did with all his victims. Deb was loved by many people. They deserved to have a funeral for her and get closure. But Dexter selfishly took her off life support and threw her body away as if only he had the right. It's clear that Dexter can't think of anyone besides himself. And as if that wasn't horrific enough, as if he hasn't been selfish enough, he then abandons Hannah, the woman he just couldn't live without, to raise his son, who he also abandons because he felt sad after Deb's death. That's right, he left his child with Hannah McKay, the murderous escapee, with a penchant for poisoning people who inconvenience her. What if Harrison had ever become inconvenient for her? What about when he became a teenager? She could have killed him too. Dexter doesn't even think about that. He just leaves his toddler-aged son with a lunatic and starts a new life across the country, where he later snaps the neck of Officer Logan so he can stay out of prison. And don't forget that before Harrison tracked Dexter down to Iron Lake, he was left traumatized by the knowledge that his mother was killed by Trinity, and the fact that his father had abandoned him. He became a drug addict and a vagrant and had no one in the world to help him. It's honestly a miracle he survived it all, and the fact that he did was no thanks to his deadbeat dad, Dexter. No, Dexter is a horrible person, and our desire to enjoy him and the show doesn't change that fact. Dexter Morgan truly is the worst. If you like this video, check out our breakdown of why Harry Morgan is way worse than you remember. Someone just cut you off in traffic? Don't slash their tires, slash the subscribe button for more Dexter videos. Thanks for watching.